Being a first generation Filipino-American, what traditions are instilled in you that was different from your friends when you were younger?
My parents were very Catholic, very traditional, even though my mom was 7 months pregnant with me when she left the Philippines and went to California and the United States. And so they were very, still conservative with their beliefs. So we didn't talk about sex at all. And, I wasn't allowed to go to friends' houses. My dad was really protective, absolutely no dating. I definitely also experienced, they were not very supportive of me being queer or lesbian or anything like that. And I knew very young that I had attraction to women. I went to Catholic school and can remember like spending way too much time with the 8th grade girls and knowing like really early on that was not going to be okay in the church. And both my parents, really took us to church, and that wasn't always common. I did have friends who had parents that they could talk about these things too, but in our family that was not okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the O.school first?
Sure. O.school is a place where people all over the world can learn about sexuality and pleasure, and in a place that's non-judgmental, but also very science-based. And our goal is to be able to help people live in the sexuality that's right for them, right? It's not about having sex, not having sex. It's just about feeling comfortable with your own sexuality.
What I found quite shocking was that you had this interview where you talked about something that was okay to talk about with your entire family, which was getting your period. And I love what you said. In some ways, my body didn't belong to me, it belonged to the family. Can you tell us a bit how you took your ownership back, whether your body, your sexuality, your identity as a person?
So I was old. I was not, it was not a thing that I would say I took ownership younger. I was already, after college. I got married young because, of course, good Filipino daughter, you like get married and you're gonna do all of that. And I knew early on that, I couldn't even think that I could be a lesbian, because for me it was like family is so important, and so I stuffed it all away. So when I started working on O.school, I was already my mid-20s. I had already been married. I was working in a venture capital fund. Before that, I was, building technology company, an accounting software company. So I was very established when I started to explore sexuality for myself. And it was really amazing, but it was also really hard to find resources. That's actually one of the reasons I started O.school in the first place, because I was quite late bloomer in this way. My mom and my dad have been married for like almost 30 years. Or excuse me, over 30 years. I'm 30. So I'm a honeymoon baby. So over 30 years they've been married. So I was calling my mom a few years ago, when I got divorced, and I was so ashamed. I thought she was going to be upset, because like we're Catholic, you don't get divorced. And I told her everything. I told her about, being gay and I'm getting divorced, and like I have all these dreams and I'm going to start a sex company. Like I really laid on my
yeah.
And I remember she was just like, "Baby, you're so wild," and like we got so close after that, closer than we ever got. And then also my dad and I became closer, and so it was a big moment in our family. It's so funny because in my house, there's like clitoris models everywhere, and like
yeah,
pillows, and my parents are so used to it, and but it takes time. I think it's funny that growing up we didn't talk about it once, and now it's everywhere. But I think it's important, because I think Filipinos, a lot of things stay in the quiet. There's a lot of secrets. It's not like they don't have experience with this, but in the out in the open, you can't talk about it. But at the same time, everybody, has many stories, many secrets. And I think that's one thing I would like to see change in Filipino culture, in that, Filipino-American culture and all the areas of the diaspora. We should talk about these things more. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Do you have any advice? I think this advice for people who want to build a startup, considering that you went through a lot during that time.
Startups are some of the hardest experiences you can go through. And I think the story I will share is I didn't just start on my own. I worked for the smartest woman I knew. She called me right as I was done with college, and she said, "Hey, let's build accounting software." And we worked together for over 3 years. And then I worked in venture capital for 2 years. And then I raised money and started doing the startup, but it wasn't overnight. Nothing is overnight. And so what I tell people, especially, people of color or like immigrants or people where, I don't come from a rich family at all. A lot of entrepreneurs, people think you have to have money. You have to be, so rich to be able to do it. And in some ways it's such a privilege to be able to do it because you have to take a lot of risk, right? My mom jokes, by the time she was my age, she had 3 babies. I've had, 3 businesses so far. And that's what I chose in my life. And I'm happy with that. But that says something. I'm not saying that you can't have babies and do startups, but it's so much time and risk. It's so much dedication. It's so much hardship. The other thing I would say for people who want to start a startup, really know why, and you don't have to quit your day job. Like I was working as an investor and I was already working on O.school my nights and weekends. It was starting to obsess me. And I always tell people, if you have to think like, oh, should I start the startup? Like, don't do it. Just keep your job. Because if you have to think, then just avoid it at all costs. Because for me, the people I was working with at the venture capital fund, they were like, you need to go do this. You're obsessed. Like, here's some money to go do it. Like, leave us alone. It was something that I knew was something I could see myself doing for 2-3 decades of my life. This is not just go get rich in 5 years. That's not how it works. Most of the most amazing founders that I've met and worked with, they're on year 10, 11, 12 of their companies. And it's not a quick thing, right? And being Filipino, it's not like we're not entrepreneurial. Everybody had an uncle selling vacuums or like, an aunt like that's entrepreneurial. You're an entrepreneur, right? Like you have your own tindahan. You're an entrepreneur. Like that's a thing that you have, right, in your life. The type of entrepreneurship I do is like big swings. So, I raise millions of dollars to try to build something truly huge, and it's just a different animal. And so just also know how big of an organization you really want. And for me, it was like day one, I said, I want to reach 1 billion people. And that required a different level of scale. But I think lots of types of people are entrepreneurs. Just they're different types of entrepreneurs.
So who gave you the most backlash with O.school, and how did you deal with the backlash?
Yeah, it hasn't really affected me too much to be said that. It's like funny to me because again, in your heart of hearts, like this is a very needed space, and especially venture capitalists. Like sometimes when the people would say it's not going to work, they're not saying it's not a big market, right? It's a huge market. Like almost every human being, save for in vitro fertilization person on this planet, is here because 2 people had sex, and it's a huge market. That's a really exciting opportunity. But what gets people to be against it is all these beliefs that it's wrong or it's bad, and that comes from the church, that comes from society, culture, and I actually see why a lot of people told me it wouldn't work, because it's really hard to change culture, and to base a business on that is challenging. But the backlash that people gave me oftentimes were just based on what I saw as their limiting beliefs. I don't have those beliefs. For me, it's like when you're an entrepreneur and you're building something that you want to change the world, you have to imagine the future. And it's like, here's the future when O.school succeeds, and here's the future if we don't succeed. And I do not believe that the future is going to be more conservative. I think it's going to be the other way around. And so I'm willing to bet with my life, which is the most important thing to bet with, right? It's more important than money is your time on this planet to make impact. And I'm willing to bet my life on that. So when people don't believe, it's actually the one thing I will say that I like about all the backlash that I've had is it's very easy to see who's on our team and who's like who believes or who doesn't. Because I've even had investors who tell me, oh, I'm not going to invest. It's never going to work. But then like stop me before I go to the bathroom and ask me like 5 questions about their marriage and how can they their kids up. So it's a lot of hypocrisy, like, so, did it ever really bother me? No. I think the worst type of backlash is when people who believe in what you believe, but they don't like how you're doing it. They want to tell you to do it a different way. That's sometimes even harder than the people who are just against what you do. Because those people will just leave you alone and like, you don't have to listen to them. But when you're trying to build a community, that's the hardest thing. From what I've learned, and that's the hardest thing, is people on the side that you're on saying that, the things that you're doing are not the right ones, not the right decisions, or they're not, how they would do it. That's harder in my experience. I remember being like 16 or 17 and thinking like, because Filipinos have a big beauty pageant culture, and you're supposed to be hot, you're supposed to be pretty, you're supposed to be beautiful all the time, but then you're not supposed to have sex. It's like, that's the most ridiculous thing. Like, how are you supposed to expect, someone to be desirable? And then it really goes to show that it's just one-sided. It's like, specifically women's pleasure, women's sexuality is regulated. Because I also remember growing up, I couldn't have people over my room. I couldn't, dress a certain way. I couldn't, do anything before marriage. But nobody was saying that to my male cousins or my brother. It's a huge, huge gendered double standard. It's not just like one rule book. There's many double standards here that I think are very present in the Philippines and America the same.
Yeah, like I was mentioning, I can't remember who I was talking to, but it's like my pet peeve. Like when a woman enjoys sex, they say, "Oh, she's such a maniac." But when a guy enjoys sex, it's always like, "Oh, he's a guy. He's just being macho," and I can't stand that.
Oh.
Okay, tech business is a very competitive space. How do you stay relevant while keeping authentic?
That's interesting. I really practice a lot of meditation and spirituality and knowing for myself what's right. Like, it's interesting, like relevant to whom, authentic to whom. Like, I really start to knowing that, I think about my customers, I think about the impact I want to have. And I also, honestly, the older I get, the longer I'm in tech, the more I'm realizing I'm a better entrepreneur when my life's not all about work. When I was younger, I was so obsessed. It was just like work, 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 work. Like, I traveled all the time. I worked all the time. And I can say that now it's not the center of my life. Sometimes my family takes precedence. Sometimes my relationships take precedence. Sometimes my friendships take precedence. Sometimes my health and my spirituality, especially with the pandemic. I think the way to stay authentic and the way to stay relevant is to be a balanced human being who has other parts in your life. Because if you become overly focused, you actually lose your ability to be creative. You lose your ability to listen to your intuition. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, like, they brag like, I haven't slept, or I only work. And, even me, when I first started, I think you just learn to get obsessed. But I think it's much, much, much more effective to be super rested and sleep a lot and, take time off to go on vacation. Some of my best ideas I got when I blew off work completely and just decided to go into the forest and meditate, or, spend time with my friends or my family and get ideas that way and get re-inspired on why you do the work. Because I've been an entrepreneur now in tech for 10 years, and there were times when you want to quit. You just don't remember why you did it. And no amount of reading books or like, you read all those things like getting up at 4 a.m. and working out, like, that's all great. But if you forget your why, you can't, you will just give up. At heart, I'm a business person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing that I've dedicated my life to talk about and to help alleviate shame around. But I still, believe in keeping my private life out of it, because at the end of the day, this is about service, like you said. It's not about my ego, or some people are like, oh, like, do you love talking about it because of all the things? And I'm like, no, like, that's a therapy. That's something you do in therapy to deal with your own issues. We're just trying to have these conversations, out in the open.
I think people get confused sometimes if they need therapy or actual professional. I mean, let's say we had an episode on finance, and this person really needed therapy, but like, she was asking for financial advice. Like, people get confused now. And what is interesting is there's a lot of people not really self-aware. They haven't done that work, and they go into the world, they really unload a lot of their baggage, and yet they they don't get the help they need because they're really not sure where they're at, I think. But that's the challenge, right? That's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People are starving to talk about this. They're
Yeah.
really starving to talk about and to be vulnerable. And that's, I mean, I think also just from the feel of of both of you, I can see that people want to share, and it's amazing. You really do see that we need more therapy, we need more education, we need more connection.
What is the best advice you've received?
The best. So I live by 4 mantras called the Fourfold Way. I have a big tattoo of it, all here, 4 animals. And it's this book about Indigenous leadership. And there's 4 archetypes of a leader. There's a warrior, a healer, a teacher, and a visionary. And they all have a mantra. And this is like advice, but it's something that I live by. And I try to like journal about it and think about it on all my decisions. And they're simple mantras. The warrior is show up and choose to be present. The healer is pay attention to what has heart and meaning. The visionary is tell the truth without blame or judgment. And the teacher is be open to outcome, but not attached to outcome. And those are the ways I try to lead. And it's one of my favorite books called The Fourfold Way.
The Fourfold Way. What is your advice to those struggling?
Trust your struggle. That's one radical acceptance of struggle, and radical acceptance of struggle. Like, I don't want to lie to them. Like, it's going to get better. It's never going to get better. This is actually my best advice is nothing you will ever accomplish will make that feeling go away if you do not start to learn your inner purpose and start to develop your relationship with the true calling that you have. And that, things will get better if I make this higher. Things will get better if I just raise this money. That is the way to be in suffering forever. And so learning to enjoy all the parts of the roller coaster is everything. And so at the midst of your struggle, how do you cultivate joy? How do you cultivate humor? How do you go closer? How do you start to be in radical acceptance of the struggle and radically take care of yourself in those situations? So it doesn't matter. So if I had to like sum this up, even if your business is not doing well, you have to be well. You are not your business. And what I often see is people get on these like, oh, when the business is good, I'm good. But when the business is bad, I'm bad. And the truth is when you're an entrepreneur, you can't control those things. And so my advice for people struggling is trust the struggle, be in acceptance of the struggle, but radically take care of yourself.